Before I get started, I just wanted to recommend everyone check out the great pages on the cutting room floor about this particular prototype demo thing. It's a great site and deserves your support. Also consider checking out the people who brought us this amazing treasure by following them at Team Spaceworld on Twitter. Thanks. With Pokémon Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu recently being revealed, and Pokémon Quest just having released on Switch, it's shocking to think that the biggest Pokémon news of the day is about a 20-year-old Game Boy game. If you somehow missed it, the Pokémon Gold and Silver demo from the 1997 Spaceworld trade show leaked recently, unloading a metric ton of cut content onto the internet. As such, I'd like to take you guys through the demo, talk about some of the more interesting aspects, and lament the loss of some truly amazing designs. The first thing to note is that there are basically 4 distinct ROMs out there currently. 2 account for the Gold and Silver demos that were on the show floor for attendees to actually play, while 2 more are special debug versions. There's also an English translation and quote-unquote remastered version planned by the team that released the ROMs. At the time of this video, however, it is not yet complete, so perhaps we'll return to this project at a later date. Let's begin with the non-debug demos first. At this point in development, Gold and Silver seem to very clearly be Game Boy titles, which makes sense given that the Game Boy Color was still a year off, as well as the massive overhauls Gold and Silver would see before they were released in 1999. This makes it all the more interesting that the opening cinematic follows the final games very closely. Take a look. The title screen is probably the element that has changed the most here, and as it appears similar between both versions and Lugia is nowhere to be seen, my guess is that the Game Freak intended for Ho-Oh to be the primary legendary for both versions. Now you might think that that's all that can be said about the game's intro, but there's actually one more point of interest here. If you wait on the title screen long enough, you'll be able to play a simple platform minigame starring Pikachu. The objective is to collect Jigglypuff's notes, though there doesn't appear to be any goal aside from getting a high score. Get into the actual game itself then, shall we? It opens with Professor Oak saying something presumably about Pokémon, and then we are dropped into our room, which interestingly enough sports a Nintendo 64, something not seen in the final game. There's not much else to do here, so we might as well set off into the world. At this point, it's pretty clear that Gold and Silver were entirely different games. The town, which in this version is known as Silent Hill, yeah, for real, differs pretty heavily in layout and geography from New Barktown. In fact, the whole region is drastically different, being based directly on the entirety of Japan itself. Heading to the left, we get our first taste of battle, and our first taste of the really interesting stuff. At the start of the demo, you were randomly assigned one of 3 proposed starter Pokémon, and this is your opportunity to try it out in battle. The starters featured are Chikorita, Flambear, and Cruz, only one of which would see inclusion in the final product, although Cruz may very well have gone on to inspire Poplio's design. There's a surprisingly large variety of Pokémon to battle and catch as you make your way through the tall grass into the large cavern forest that sits to the west of Silent Hill. You can even encounter shiny Pokémon, which do seem to actually have different palettes, at least when running on a Super Game Boy. Your standard Pidgeys and Rattatas are of course present, but more interesting Beta-Mons also make an appearance, such as Meryl, featuring a slightly different all-pink design if you're playing Silver, or an adorable cat-like version of Hoppip if you're playing Gold. I also happened to encounter a Skarmory at one point, which was kinda interesting. Trainer battles are also present, but completely optional. If you're playing for speed, it's all over in probably no more than 2 minutes. Exiting the cave brings you to an outdoor area where, upon speaking to a character that strongly resembles the rival from the final game, you are booted to the title screen, and assuming this is Spaceworld 1997, also presumably booted out of line. Now if that were it would still be an embarrassment of riches, but through some dark magic, there's more. Let's jump into those debug ROMs. I'll be looking exclusively at Gold's debug as I had some problems with the Silver ROM, but the differences should be negligible. Upon pressing select at the title screen, we are greeted with a debug menu offering 6 options. The first one, Fight, brings up a battle tester which I still don't have full grasp on. The gist of it seems to be that you can create a team from any of the 251 Pokemon available, set their levels, and fight them against any Pokemon or possibly any trainer. It's not entirely intuitive for me, and I think that the language barrier gets in the way a bit here. I'll probably have more to say when the English release is out. Skipping the second option for now, we have the third, which is a broken sound test, which is always nice. And then fourth, we have a collection of 5 minigames. The first minigame is a version of poker featuring Pokemon characters. It's simple, but effective, featuring 5 different Pokemon as suits and values represented as levels from 1 to 10. Then we have a slide puzzle, which is, well, a slide puzzle, and you can't exit it until you complete it for some reason. As I'm terrible with this sort of thing, and also hate slide puzzles in general, I ended up just resetting. The finished puzzles are pretty nice looking though, if you have the patience. Next we have more gambling in the form of a memory match game. Again, it's very straightforward, but interestingly, this game apparently made it into the final game's code, although it remains unused. Next we have Picross, which is another thing I don't have any patience for, and lastly, more gambling with slots, that apparently works somewhat similarly to how they do in the final game. Back at the main debug menu, we have the Monster option, which allows us to look at all 251 Pokemon that exist in this build, including Chikorita's bizarre abandoned second form, Blossomole. Now as cool as this option is, there's actually a much better way to view these Pokemon that we'll get to shortly, where we can actually see their intended color palettes. The final option allows us to view the game's map and access what is essentially a functioning sound test, with a neat radio interface. That's certainly a lot, but the real meat and potatoes of the menu is the second option, which is translated as Field. Selecting this option throws you right into the game itself. The only scripted events present seem to be those found in the public demo, but there's a lot more to do here outside of that. Checking the Pokédex, you'll find that all 251 Pokemon are registered, and by scrolling through it, we can see a ton of unused and reworked designs in the palette that they were intended to be seen in. Many of these designs are simply wonderful, and it's a shame that they'll likely go unused forever. At this point in development, Gold and Silver seem to be much more about expanding the original games, rather than entirely fleshing out brand new characters. With baby forms of Vulpix, Tangela, Goldeen, Paris, Doduo, Meowth, Ponyta, Grimer, Growlithe, and Mr. Mime, joining the baby forms that did make it into the game, like Magby and Pichu, who has one of the best beta sprites by the way. Equally incredible are some of the cut evolutions, including Animon, a bizarre Screaming Ditto evolution that may have featured metal properties, Bellsmith, a Weeping Bell evolution that would have evolved via the cut Poison Stone, and even the eventual Gen 4 Pokemon Leafeon. Oh, and also this guy, Lick, an evolved form of Lickitung which, in my opinion, is a million times better than what we actually got. Still, we have characters that were completely reworked, like Politoed, Ariados, and the face of God himself, Porygon 2. The 3 legendary dogs were entirely changed, being much simpler in design and, in my opinion, more appealing for that reason. Most shocking to me though is that some entirely new Pokemon were also scrapped. The most grievous exclusion here being Tigret and Electiger, 2 of the cutest damn things to ever grace this godforsaken planet. And also the eel from Super Mario 64, arguably one of the most terrifying. There's honestly plenty more to talk about here, but let's move on. Field mode actually has its own dedicated debug menu with a lot of interesting options. The first being Warp, which, appropriately, allows you to warp to any of the 16 selectable areas. This is helpful, but my preferred way of traveling is by pressing the B button. Not only does this allow you to run, but it also turns off collision, allowing you to go out of bounds and explore normally inaccessible areas. One such area to explore is New Type, which is of particular interest for its similarities to Canalave City from the Diamond and Pearl games. In fact, a few of the maps hold similarities to those found in Gen 4. Fitting, as that generation also had a focus on expanding previous evolution lines, perhaps a subtle callback to when that was Gen 2's philosophy? In my opinion, this is the best part of the debug version. There's all sorts of interesting stuff to discover, including gyms that also seemingly double as schoolrooms, and even some Team Rocket hideouts. Best of all though, Pokémon data exists for all patches of grass, so you can get a better idea of how the game was going to progress and where certain Pokémon might be found. Another fun feature is the character viewer, which allows you to take an NPC along with you for the journey. The last feature I want to go over, though there is certainly plenty more that could be said, is the time adjustment feature. Gen 2 featured day and night cycles, and I guess this is an early precursor to that. By setting the time to 1 minute before midnight, I was able to get a taste of how they envisioned the system. With that being said, I think I'd like to end it there. Thanks again to the Cutting Room Floor for being an invaluable resource for this video, and thank you to everyone who watches or supports me on Patreon. I can't express my gratitude enough. Well, that's all from me for now. I've actually got some vacationing to do, but I'll see you guys again in a few days for some pre-E3 excitement. Thanks again.